The Israeli apartheid regime has continued to expand its colonialist policies ever since the creation of Israel. I mean, even before, which is 1947, 1948, even before that, the Zionist movement was fundamentally based on settler colonialism. One of the founding fathers, the most important figure in the modern political Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl, referred to Zionism as a colonial project. He referred to it as, quote, something colonial. He wrote letters to the British colonialist, this genocidal maniac, Cecil Rhodes, asking for support from Cecil Rhodes, the colonizer of Africa, asking for support from the British government for this colonial project. He considered modern-day Argentina and Uganda, and eventually they settled on Palestine. And through the Balfour Declaration, the British government, the British Empire, which had colonized Palestine after the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in which the French and British colonial powers carved up the formal colonies of the Ottoman Empire. Palestine was a colony of Britain, and later it turned it into an area of settler colonization for the Zionist movement. So going back to even before the State of Israel was founded, it has always been a colonialist project. And still today, it continues to be a colonialist project. Here is an article just published in AFP, the major international newswire. The apartheid Israel regime unveils plan to double settlers in occupied Golan. And this article was just published on December 26th, so that is yesterday. Israel on Sunday unveiled a plan to spend more than $300 million to double the Jewish settler population in the Golan Heights, 40 years after annexed the territory captured from Syria. Now, they don't mention it in this line. The Golan Heights are illegally occupied by Israel. They have been illegally occupied by Israel since 1967. They are, according to international law, the Golan is part of Syria. It is Syrian sovereign territory. And we see yet another example of Israel continuing to expand its colonial policies with a bipartisan green light from Washington. The Biden administration has not said a single word because they support these policies. They support the colonization. This is bipartisan colonialism. And I want to stress here that who is the prime minister, as the article points out? It is no longer Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, there were liberal Zionists who insisted to us that the problem in apartheid Israel was only Benjamin Netanyahu, who was concentrated in this odious character, just as liberals in the United States often want us to think the real problem is not the U.S. government. It is not the war machine. It's not the empire. It's not the police state. It's not Wall Street. It's not Silicon Valley. It's one individual named Donald Trump. Liberal Zionists did the same thing, claiming that the problem in apartheid Israel is not the apartheid. It's not the colonialism. It's one individual named Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, Netanyahu, news alert, he's no longer prime minister of Israel. He was the longest serving prime minister of Israel, longer even than the founding father of the Israeli colonialist regime, David Ben-Gurion. But he's no longer his prime minister. Now, Naftali Bennett is prime minister and is continuing the same policies because, shocker, this is bipartisan in Israel as well. This is what the foundation of Israel is built on, is colonialism, ethnic cleansing, displacing the indigenous Arab population, in the case of Palestine or in the case of the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory, and replacing it with Israeli settlers. So let me go through this article really briefly. Our goal is to double the population. He's talking about the Israeli settler population in the Golan, Bennett said, as he presented his $317 million program to expand settlers in the area. They noted that it was seized by Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War. in an act of aggression, in a war of colonialism. And then in 1981, Israel annexed, and scare quotes, the Golan Heights. And they point out this is a move not recognized by most of the international community. Yeah, they say most because the U.S. is one of the only countries. But no, according to international law, it is illegal. It is not recognized by international law. And they talk about how Trump under Trump, the U.S. government recognized Israel's fake sovereignty over the Syrian Golan. So we see these bipartisan policies. They point out shortly after Biden took office in January, Secretary of State Antony Blinken suggested there were legal questionings surrounding Trump's move. But Blinken indicated that there was no thought of reversing course, obviously, because this is bipartisan, and Antony Blinken, a hardline war hawk, supports Israeli colonialism. Now, they also point out that the government of Syria, which is the sovereign owner of this territory, referred to it as a, quote, flagrant violation of its sovereignty, which is an objective fact. According to international law, it is a flagrant violation of Syrian sovereignty. Now, why is Israel so interested in the Golan Heights? Well, a lot of it is because of water. Water plays a huge role, and Israel as a country is reliant on stealing water from its neighbors. Of course, this is a relatively desert-oriented region. And let me get up this report here of the role of water in the Golan Heights. Here is a propaganda tweet from the Israeli government. This is the official @Israel Twitter account. How does a small Middle Eastern country like Israel get all of the water it needs and more? We're sharing some of our innovative solutions. No, they get a lot of that water from stealing it from surrounding Arab populations. So here is an article in Haaretz, which not a good newspaper, liberal Zionist newspaper. They sometimes do journalism that's helpful. Israel incapable of telling truth about water it steals from Palestinians. And this is by Amir Haas, one of the best Israeli journalists. Here we go. Israel imposes a quota on the amount of water Palestinians are allowed to produce and consume. On average, the Palestinians consume 73 liters per person per day, below the recommended minimum. Israelis consume a daily 180 liters on average. That is 2.5 times what Palestinians consume of water. And there are those who say even more. And here, unlike there, you will not find thousands who consume 20 liters a day in the summer. But they also don't mention that the Golan Heights provides Israel with 1/3 of its water. Here we go. This is a source directly from the mouth of the Israeli government, the Israeli apartheid regime. Here is the official website of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They don't even hide it. Here we go. The Golan, talk about the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. The region's strategic importance derives from its location, overlooking the Israeli Galilee region, and from the fact that it supplies the Lake Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, a major source of water for Israel, with 1/3 of its water. So they don't even hide it. Israel uses this to steal water from Syria, just as it also steals water from Palestine, because the Israeli apartheid regime is a regime built on colonialism. So, I mean, I can't necessarily say I'm super surprised, but we see another example of the Israeli apartheid regime continuing these colonialist policies with a green light from the Biden administration, just like the Trump administration had given it before. Now, speaking of Syria, I just want to point out something. You know, people just celebrated Christmas, especially in the United States. Christmas is obviously a huge holiday. I'm going to share a beautiful video that this great Lebanese journalist, activist, communicator on social media that he shared, showing footage from Malula, Syria. He points out this is one of the last remaining Aramaic villages in the world where inhabitants speak the native language of Jesus Christ himself. And every noon they play a Virgin Mary chant from the famous Lebanese singer Feiruz, beautiful singer, musician, from their churches. So here is video that he shared of Malula, Syria. And you can see the Christmas tree in this Syrian Christian village. Now, what happened in Malula? Let me turn this audio down. What happened in Malula? Malula was taken over by extremist Salafi jihadic fanatics, the so-called moderate rebels, backed by the U.S. government. My colleague Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone has visited Malula and interviewed people who survived after their churches were taken over and destroyed and vandalized by these Salafi jihadist fanatics, including Al-Qaeda, that's Jabhat al-Nusra, the Syrian Al-Qaeda affiliate, and its spin-offs. So as I tweeted here, I pointed out, I mean, we have to understand the insane irony of this country in the heart of West Asia, the birthplace of Christianity, where they speak Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus Christ himself, the historical figure. And yet, in the United States, there's been a bipartisan campaign, not only by Democrats, but by Bible-thumping Republicans who think that George Washington was blessed by God, that Jesus Christ personally shines down on the United States and the U.S. war machine. These Christian fundamentalist extremists in the U.S. have been allied with Al-Qaeda in Syria, supporting Salafi jihadist fascists in their war on indigenous Christians in Syria. I mean, we have to understand the insanity of the crimes that the U.S. has committed across the region, but especially in Syria. A lot of people just celebrated Christmas, so I just had to point that out because it should make you furious. It should make you furious. The insane imperial hypocrisy. I mean, that's what I talk about all the time, is that imperial hypocrisy.